morning. So, short time, we get an extra 10 minutes because we're really special. Actually, I think our guests are really special. I will let them tell you how special they are. But let's jump right in. You can help. Please remember to go to Slido to submit your questions, which we'll take toward the end. We'll spend most of this half hour talking about the regulatory future. But first, let's come up to speed with the regulatory present. And for that, let's start with Dr. Mark Rosekind, Administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So Mark, what is NHTSA up to these days regarding automated and connected driving?
Busy. Let me mention there are 3 lanes that we're pushing pretty hard on. One is proactive vehicle safety. The second is advanced safety technology. And the third is about human choices, that 94% that's all about the human. But probably the focus, I'll be the first one to say the A word related to those advanced safety technologies, is in January, Secretary Fox announced that we'd be working over 6 months to come out with 4 documents. And if you do your math, that means that next month we'll be announcing, first, deployment and operational guidance for how to get all of these autonomous new safety technologies on the road safely. 2, we're looking at a model state policy, which is to help support a uniform, consistent framework for the country. 3rd, we are structuring our interpretations and exemptions. So if people have requests, we're going to give them a very specific process. And 4th, identify new tools and authorities to really help advance, if not accelerate, getting these new technologies on the road safely.
So in a month, we'll have a lot to read.
Yes.
Wow, get ready. And part of that, as you said, will be directed toward helping states as they consider regulation. James Fackler, you are Assistant Administrator at Michigan Department of State. What is Michigan doing right now?
Currently, Michigan is a testing-only state, as many of you know. New legislation was turned in the last month. We're looking to expand testing to an operator-less vehicle, as well as attempting to move towards open deployment and operation. Michigan's looking at starting the process, not unlike Nevada, where we're allowed platooning, commercial and non-commercial. And we're starting to work with a little bit more closely with the manufacturers on, I don't want to say the word ride share, but for lack of a better term, sort of a ride share idea of exposing the public to automated vehicles owned by the manufacturers in a sort of a ride share program. So we have a lot of legislation that's pending, and we'll see where over the next few months that goes.
Interesting. Legislation that perhaps will be influenced by the input that NHTSA provides.
I would imagine it will be.
We hope.
So, Jude Huron, you are now DMV Administrator in Nevada, the state that has been thinking about explicit regulation of automated driving for the longest. It's been fun, right?
Yes.
So catch us up. What is Nevada thinking about these days?
Nevada has been very busy since 2011. So the governor in January of 2016 came out with the Nevada Center for Advanced Mobility. And basically what that means is the governor's office, state agencies, county, and city are banding together to make sure that the state of Nevada remains a pioneer in this area as well. So we, within the Department of Motor Vehicles, we are actually in the process right now of revising, streamlining, as well as expanding our testing regulations. We'll be coming out with another round of regulations to streamline our consumer deployment regulations that we have as well. We're looking at, as James said as well, we'll be sending out some surveys and so forth to companies that are looking to, in the platooning area. We want to open the doors for that area as well. We're working with different companies on autonomous taxi and shuttle services. We're working with new companies. And we've got a lot, I can't discuss at this point, but we have a lot to unfold.
Just between us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Unfolding starting in September of this year and going forward. So we're working with a lot of cutting edge technologies and so forth, but just like James in Michigan and in California and all, our states want to work with industry to open the doors for industry and sit down and really take a common sense approach to how do we test and deploy these vehicles And we want to know what you want from us. How can we help you? How can we sit down and deal with things? So.
You have the benefit of 5 years of experience in this and the benefit of quite a bit of success that is, even today, Nevada attracts companies looking to test and deploy. So let me turn that around and say, given that experience, what do you wish you had done differently? What do you think the biggest mistakes are that you would caution other states or even the federal government to be aware of?
Well, the mistake I think that we made after the regulations is not, how do I say it? We didn't continue on a state or national level of making sure that we've got all the right stakeholders at the table. We want to make sure that when our regulations that we built were built upon bringing the stakeholders together and building regulations. Those regulations were direct input from stakeholders, OEMs and insurance companies and law enforcement, and we need to continue down that route. And I think it's going on in different silos, NHTSA and USDOT and different states and so forth, but I think we need to make sure that we're continuing down that road to make sure that we're deploying these technologies in a safe manner, but not wrapping everything in a lot of red tape. And we need to make sure that we're taking a common sense safety approach to this. So those are the things that we kind of strive to do. Nevada's at a stage right now of saying, hey, the technology's grown since 2011, and so now we're kind of chiseling and filtering our regulations and working with state-of-the-art companies, and it's an exciting time.
And let's talk about those government relations. So you mentioned NHTSA, and one of the challenges in this area is that traditionally, in broad, crude terms, the federal government regulates new vehicle design, whereas states regulate driving and non-commercial drivers. And here we have a technology that allows the vehicle to become the driver, and that creates some tension between the state and federal regulatory roles. Mark, how is NHTSA approaching that? How far does NHTSA's authority go? How far does its responsibility go into these traditional state domains?
So I think the good news is that we're interested in collaborating with everybody to sort of, for us, it's all about the safety. So the opportunity to test and then deploy new technologies that could save 32,675 lives on our roadways, that's what we're after. So I would say that it's less about tension as opposed to trying to find where the collaborative approaches are going to get safe automated vehicles quickly onto the roads. To the specific point, it ends up the federal government has a lot of authority in these areas, and so there have been folks who basically have pushed to just pre-exempt. That's not going to be the answer here. And that's why really trying to come up with a model that allows a unified framework, but still the flexibility, because what states choose to actually implement will be their call. But I think the idea is to help them understand, this is NHTSA's part, we'll take care of that. This is, all your realm, you do it the way you want, but hopefully the states will get together and at least have a core of that consistent, so that autonomous vehicle doesn't get to a state line and stop. It's a new meaning to geofencing, right? It's like, can't go into that state. So I think that's the issue right now, is making sure everybody knows sort of where the lines are drawn. And I'll just mention one good example of that. We did our own analysis, and then Volpe validated it. But basically, if you comply with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, you can put anything you want on the road pretty much. And so while people think there's stuff that's missing, it's only until you have a new design that's not in compliance with the FMVSS's, like no steering wheel or no brake, now you got some issues going on there. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for people, and I think the distinction was made very clearly. We have to separate testing from deployment,
right?
Because those are two different phases.
Let's talk about that difference between testing and deployment. And James, this is something that Michigan has decades of experience in, with your manufacturer's plate and the idea that, as you said, just because a system is new doesn't mean that it is illegal or prohibited necessarily. So as we're looking at broader deployments like we've seen for connected vehicles in Southeast Michigan, as we're looking at location-specific pilot programs, how do you manage this line between testing and deployment? When does something move from a test into a deployment that should be subject to different rules?
Well, I think that becomes the struggle that we as the regulators and in partnership with the manufacturers, who are really the ones doing all the work, it's I think still being sorted out, because Michigan has a long history of testing. You know, whether it's for as I was talking about earlier, whether it's about getting the certification stuff put together for US EPA and US DOT, or whether it's just development for automated technology or connected technology, Michigan has always supported an industry, I don't want to say free-for-all, but sort of the position that industry is going to do the best development when government helps them versus gets in the way. And I think Michigan's program, where we do manufacturing plates and we don't necessarily ask questions about what specifically you're doing on this particular vehicle or that particular vehicle, I think that helps us work better with the industry. And you see that when we develop legislation, and as we look at legislation, you know, the industry is there trying to help us by, one, seeing what they're doing, because I think that becomes key. It's really easy to talk in these broad terms about automated technology or connected technology, but until you see a car and understand just what it does, I think that the best piece for me was when we got the opportunity to ride in a car in California. You know, Bernard Soriano from California helped get the team an opportunity to ride in a car, and it really changed from this, oh, I read about this in the magazines, to this thing is really a lot closer to reality than I think most people who aren't in the industry realize. So I think there is a gray line, and it becomes very difficult to go, at this point, now it's really ready, because I think there's a lot of pieces with connected and automated vehicles that are ready, and you're starting to see that already with parking, with you know, the Super Cruise idea, the highway, different programs that are being offered by different manufacturers. So we're already seeing it go out. And in Michigan, we say, you know, it's not a fully automated vehicle, so you can do those things. You can do the parking. You can do those things. You're not prohibited, as you know, as the director said.
You mentioned the rides.
Yeah.
Get in a vehicle. Is anyone in an automated vehicle in the audience? Raise your hand. People will look at you. They will come up to you, ask you questions. Very good.
Yeah, one guy.
So you get in these and you drive for a few miles, and generally you don't crash. And the conclusion is, oh wow, this is amazing. This must be safer than humans. This must be ready. Now, the reality is, as good and as bad as human drivers are, generally we don't crash within a few miles. And that makes the comparison very difficult. How to take this anecdotal experience of an enjoyable ride, as we've all done, and translate that into some concrete statement about the safety or readiness of these vehicles. So let me ask each of you, how safe is safe enough? Let's start with the true experts on this question. Nitsa, Mark, how safe is safe enough?
Two things. One is, for years, actually even when I was at the NTSB meeting a lot of folks in this development area, my question's been, what are the new safety metrics? Because we can't just take lives lost, injuries prevented, crashes, and count those the same way, miles driven, as the cutoff to saying, okay, not okay. So we need new safety metrics. And I think those are being developed as we speak. I'll give you one example. When we were in Mountain View with a bunch of NHTSA folks, they actually were in a vehicle where somebody had opened the door and somebody parked on the side. Vehicle stopped hard, crash avoided. But of course, it got labeled as hard braking. So what's interesting is if that were reported to the California DMV, that would have been, quote, used against them as, oops, hard braking, as opposed to crash avoided. We need new safety metrics. That part, I think, is going to be absolutely critical. And the second part is I think we're going to have to broaden our view of what the data sources for those metrics might be. Because now we have laboratory work, we have simulation, we have controlled field work, we have field operational tests, and we've got real-world data. So we've got a much broader range of methodologies that are available to us, and I think we have to now, if you think about it, carefully make sure we match those up, what the new metrics are going to be, and the multiple sources of data. And the other, just last thing I'll say is I think regulation we have to be really careful about, because knowing what it is, doing it now, if you were to have a regulation on any aspect of this, you would have version 242.38 out before the regulation was actually on the street. And so we need nimble and flexible rapid prototyping kinds of approaches. They're going to be able to collect data so we can make these calls literally in the moment. So we know how going forward we're going to be iterating more and more safety.
So we need something new, something different. Tell us what that means in terms of law. Are you saying there needs to be new federal legislation to provide you new flexibility, new tools? Are you saying you can do that with notice and comment rulemaking, the kind of slower, deliberative rules that you suggested would be far outpaced by the technology? Or with existing statute, with existing regulation, can you give developers in your agency that flexibility that you say you need?
So I would hypothetically say that you have to think about that as a system. So there may be current structures already available through interpretations, exemptions that give people that. So Google came with 64 requests for interpretations. They got 29 of them. Everybody heard about the operating system being able to, right, be the substitute for the driver. That was mostly in the design area. You know, people think it's another part of it was really the design area. We also, with GM, they had a mirror question, and BMW got a self-parking interpretation, and there was a 48-volt. So we already have certain authorities that allow us to do that. But I think we also have to look for what the new authorities might be, and there may be regulatory approaches to that, but there could also be other things within industry best practices, guidelines, that are, again, more nimble and flexible. What is unusual is everybody expects regulation comes out, and then that's what it is forever. And this job is react and enforce. That will not work for this area. And so I think we're going to have something different in July. I bet the Secretary will have a lot to say about that.
You're just tantalizing us. So cars will change once we get them. Rules will change necessarily as those cars change. And so you introduced two complexities to this question, how safe is safe enough? First is, how do we measure that safety? And second, who decides? Who has the burden and who ultimately makes that decision? So James, turn to you. How safe is safe enough?
Again, I go back to, you know, our state has traditionally worked with manufacturers hand in hand as we look at new technology. I think from our perspective is that the industry doesn't want to put something out that will negatively affect future sales and reputation. I think you see that time and time again with something that comes out and it doesn't work necessarily the way it was intended, or maybe doesn't provide the same level of safety risk that it was assumed when it came out. I don't know that the DMV is the best person to speak about how safe is safe enough. You know, we work in partnership with a lot of different agencies, federal, state, and local, on whether it's seatbelts or airbags or child safety or drunk driving and drug driving, all these different things. And as much as we would all, probably everyone in this room wants to build the safest car possible, there are unfortunately always going to be that one life or two lives. And so I don't know that I would have the best metric to come up with when safe is safe enough. I think Michigan has taken the approach of let's start slow. So let's start with testing. And let's make sure there's a driver, and the driver meets all the normal requirements of a driver. Okay, so the next step is, I think, you know, now we're there 3 years later, let's look at testing without an operator, let's look at deployment, but still not back away from making sure that if there is somebody behind the wheel, they are a licensed driver, they're not suspended, revoked, denied, they're not medically unable. And I know some people outside of the industry look at that and go, well, you're preventing future technology. I look at it as we're baby stepping. So the next thing is, okay, if something does happen with this car, I want to make sure that the person who is there can actually take over, because I don't want to put somebody in a position of, okay, you know, we often talk about somebody who is visually impaired. I don't want to put the person behind the wheel who is visually impaired who has to take over now, who the car wasn't supposed to be in that situation but does get themselves in that situation. I've created an opportunity, quite candidly, for failure. There's no way that that's going to be a successful outcome. And so, you know, the states are probably just moving in some respect a little bit slower than NHTSA, but I think sometimes we feel like we're a lot closer to the public. And I don't mean that negatively to NHTSA. I mean that, you know, people walk into my branch and they expect certain things immediately.
And James, you've mentioned industry a few times. Who is the industry? Who is not the industry?
Well, I think traditionally, you know, in Michigan, it's been the manufacturers, tier one suppliers. But over the last few years, you know, more and more we have gotten involved with technology companies, whether it's sensors or LiDAR or software developers. Last year I was here, and it was the first time I was at this conference, and I've always done the DMV thing and that sort of stuff, and spending a couple hours in the vendor area gave me a different perspective on how closely the software people work with, those suppliers. And I guess on one level I knew that, but on another level it's not something that I would have gone and said, oh, we need to talk to software developers as we're talking about industry in this field. And I think Michigan has now seen that those industries are coming to the discussion in Michigan as it relates to legislation. You see it with the hacking bills that were part of the legislation that we're looking at. I think that bubble is getting bigger. And quickly, I don't know where the bubble starts and stops, but I know that as people come to us, we're bringing them in and going, tell us what we can learn from you to help give the best thing for the industry as a whole.
Jude, this was a concern even in 2011, as you talked not just about rules that would apply to Google, which was at the time the most involved company in your state, but to traditional automakers, to the small startup in a garage. How does this reality that industry could in fact be much broader than we traditionally think drive your analysis of this question of how safe is safe enough, how it's demonstrated, who decides?
It's exciting because a lot of the things that we built with the industry in 2011 are coming true. You got the company called Cruise out of California that's attaching technology to existing vehicles. You've got a new company called Odo that just came out that we're working with to build some test license with them. There's attaching technology to existing commercial vehicles. You've got companies that are working on taxi and shuttle services for fully autonomous vehicles. You got platooning that is actually will at some point in time cross and connect with autonomous vehicle technology as well. So it's expanding and it's growing, and we're excited about it. We're actually working with a company that come in September, we're actually expanding our testing requirements as well as streamlining them down to make sure that a handicapped individual could actually be a test operator for a company. We've got technology that we're working with companies on cutting edge technology that is not even defined within the SAE definitions. So to answer the question, what is safe is safe, I would piggyback off of Mark and James as well, is that our partnerships not only with the federal government, but with mutual states as well as the industry, you folks in the audience. It doesn't matter if you're an OEM or not, or you're an automated company, you're part of that industry that we would need to work with to make sure that, one, when you're testing, whether it's in Nevada or whatever, you're testing in a real life situation. When we issue a license in Nevada, you're issued a license in the state of Nevada, not in a certain specific area, but in the state. So we want to make sure that those real life situations, those testing realm in that area is tested robustly, and we get out of the way, but create a safety foundation for the companies that want to test in our area. And we create that safety foundation so our citizens are protected as well as you are protected, so that we can work together to make that testing and that data collected to be a robust system, so that that transition to deployment allows you to have a lot more confidence in your industry to deploy. And at that point in time, when you make that business decision on your own to deploy, we have our own consumer deployment type of regulations and so forth, which we're going to streamline down and make it sure that it's even easier.
It's the partnership you're describing.
Partnerships.
Mark, how about that?
Well, actually, I want to go back for a minute. When Johns Hopkins had the 100th anniversary of its School of Public Health, we did a panel on autonomous vehicles. So we had Chris Gerdes, who's a professor at Stanford, and Ron Medford, who's director of safety for Google, Nat Buse, who's an associate administrator at NHTSA, and this question of, so how safe is safe enough? Nobody would answer. So I'd actually like to throw the gauntlet down, which is, I don't think we need equivalency. You know, a lot in regulations, it's like, prove your new technology's equivalent to what we've got. And my response to that is 32,675 lives lost. And the number for 2015 is going up. We don't need equivalency. And so while I'm not setting it at the moment, I would just say we need, start with 2 times better, You know, we need to set a higher bar if we expect safety to actually be a benefit here as opposed just to the equivalency. So we got to set a higher bar, and it's going to be iterative probably, but we got to start somewhere. So while nobody wants to say how good is good enough, you know, I'd actually say start at 2 times, and then let's work from there and see what we can get.
You're saying the present is not good enough, and we have to remember that we're facing a tragic status quo.
Right.
It's a 747 crashing every week for a year. That's what the losses are on our highways. And it's just, that is unacceptable.
To build on this idea of partnership, let's take some questions from Slido. At the end of that, I'm going to come back to each of you and ask you what message you would give to this audience, to industry, to the new startup that you might not even have heard of yet. But let's see if we have some questions coming up on the screen. While we're waiting for that, Mark, Tesla recently made an offer to provide substantial data. Should NHTSA accept that?
So I'm smiling because I read this, and I literally had to send a note to all my senior folks saying, did we actually get this offer? Because I think we read it where everybody else did. So we're actually looking in to see what the offer might be.
Well, now you can respond in the same form, right?
Yeah, it's like, but I would just say, if the offer's there, we're going for it, which is we think data is going to be critical for us to determine these safety metrics. And so whatever's being offered, we would openly take for analysis. In fact, one of the things we've raised with the whole industry is what we're calling anonymous data sharing. It happens in aviation all the time. We're trying to figure out in the safety realm, how could automakers and others basically share anonymous data. And in this new area of advanced safety technologies, perfect place for us to go after that.
So question here, do we need a new agency other than NHTSA to regulate automated vehicles or other technologies? Mark?
Not yet.
May we in the future?
Well, I think what we're going to see in July is the first part of what needs to be evolved. And I think even in July, we'll be pointing to a lot of others that need to help us figure this out. At some point, it may be so large that there has to be a new or a spin-off or something. But right now, at least we have a vision that can get us to where we need to be safety-wise currently.
So you'll keep your agency for the next few months.
I'm gone in January. The agency will probably be around for a long time, and the question is whether or not it needs to expand its authorities or actually have other entities that will have to go after the issues.
James, Jude, driver licensing, does that need to change? Will you have an Americans with Disabilities Act challenge saying, I should not have to go through these procedures because my car can drive for me?
Yeah, we are, actually, James and I are on the AMVA working group for autonomous vehicles.
American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators?
Yes, I apologize, yes.
Working with NHTSA?
Acronym, yes. So we are working on, that's one of the very things that we're tackling as well, especially when you're dealing with a driver-assisted technology versus fully autonomous. Basically down that road is if you're a fully autonomous vehicle, the DMVs really will not have the need to test an individual that has a fully autonomous vehicle, unless that vehicle has a technology of switching back and forth, which we don't know, but that possibility exists. But a driver-assisted technology is we want to make sure that the individual still has the ability to properly operate a vehicle on the roadways when it has the ability to switch back from manual to autonomous modes. So those are the things we are tackling, but we're also looking at the training aspect of what should the person be trained in when they purchase the actual vehicle or they're sold a used vehicle that has a driver-assisted technology. Our concerns is that we need to make sure that they're trained because there's various limitations and capabilities for each technology. And they need to, for a product liability situation, be trained properly. And how do we get to that point? So
there's more gradation in the past.
You bet.
Mark, current status of the V2V rulemaking?
We're waiting. We're waiting.
Waiting on?
Office of Management and Budget. It's been out of the DOT for a long time. And there's just a lot of going back. It's a priority for the Secretary and for NHTSA to try and see this get out there as soon as possible.
10 seconds from each of you. If you could say one thing to industry, to developers, what is it, Mark?
Rapid prototype You know, I think this is an area that things are changing so quickly. For us to keep up, we need rapid prototyping and lessons learned.
Concrete example. Thank you, James.
I would say that as we look for partnerships, when individuals come to us, or industries come to us, to be honest about what you really need. Because often when you get bogged down in almost the cat and mouse of, well, I don't want to let this person know and that person know, and I can't help.
Be open and honest.
Right.
Thank you. Jude.
Same thing. Partnerships are open and honest. Let's open the door and let's start talking. Remove the fears and myths. Let's sit down and build something on a common sense approach that works for you and everybody.
Partnership and relationship. Dr. Mark Rosekind, James Fackler, Jude Huron. Thanks to the three of you. Thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.